I did not come here to be found, I came here to disappear, and yet the moment Michael Carter stepped onto the old wooden dock, something in the air felt like it had been waiting for him long before he ever made the choice to return. The island stretched out in quiet stillness, wrapped in the low hum of wind brushing across the water, the scent of salt and damp wood lingering in every breath he took. It was the same place his grandmother had lived for decades, the same narrow strip of land surrounded by grey-blue ocean, but it did not feel abandoned, not in the way he expected. It felt held. Shadow stepped off the boat beside him, his paws landing softly against the worn planks, ears alert, eyes scanning the shoreline with a calm focus that did not match the emptiness Michael had carried for months. "There is nothing here," Michael muttered under his breath, though the words sounded thinner than he intended, as if the island itself refused to accept them. He pulled his jacket tighter against the wind, the fabric stiff from wear, the weight of it familiar in a way that grounded him even as everything else felt distant. The house stood further up the path, just beyond a cluster of weathered trees, its silhouette unchanged, its windows dark but intact, like it had simply been waiting for someone to return and notice that it never truly left. Michael started walking, each step slow, deliberate, not out of caution, but because something about this place made rushing feel wrong. Shadow moved ahead of him for a moment, then slowed, turning back just enough to check his position before continuing, not leading, not pulling, just staying connected in that quiet, unspoken way. The gravel path shifted under Michael's boots, the sound echoing faintly in the stillness, and with each step, memories began to surface without permission, fragments of a voice he had not heard in years, soft and steady, speaking about things he never thought would matter later. He pushed them down instinctively, the same way he had pushed everything else away, but the island did not let them stay buried. The closer he got to the house, the more familiar everything felt, not in detail, but in presence, like stepping into something that had been paused rather than ended. When he reached the porch, he stopped, his hand hovering just above the railing, his breath catching for a fraction of a second before settling again. The wood creaked slightly under the weight of the wind, a low, almost rhythmic sound that filled the silence without breaking it. Shadow stepped up beside him, his body still, his gaze fixed on the door, not tense, not uncertain, just aware. Michael followed his line of sight, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took in the details, the handle, the frame, the faint marks left by years of use. Nothing had been disturbed. Nothing had been changed. And yet something felt different. "It is just a house," he said quietly, but the words did not carry conviction. They barely carried sound. He reached for the door slowly, his fingers brushing against the surface, the wood cool and solid beneath his touch. For a moment, he hesitated, not because he was afraid of what was inside, but because some part of him understood that stepping through would mean facing something he had spent a long time avoiding. Shadow shifted slightly, his shoulder brushing against Michael's leg, grounding him without pressure, reminding him without words that he was not standing there alone. Michael exhaled, long and steady, and pushed the door open. The hinges moved with a soft, familiar sound, and as the interior revealed itself in dim, filtered light, something inside him tightened, then loosened all at once. The air inside was not stale. It was not empty. It carried a faint warmth, a trace of something that should not have remained after all this time. Michael stepped across the threshold slowly, his eyes adjusting, his senses sharpening, and behind him, Shadow followed without hesitation. The door remained open for a moment, the wind brushing lightly against it, then easing back as if even the outside world understood that this place was no longer waiting. It had already begun. The door does not close behind Michael Carter right away, and for a few seconds the outside world lingers at the edge of the room, the wind brushing softly through the open frame, carrying the distant sound of water against the shore, a steady rhythm that feels older than anything he can remember. He stands just inside, not moving, his eyes adjusting slowly to the dim interior as the light settles into shapes and edges that begin to feel familiar in ways he did not expect. Shadow steps further in, his paws quiet against the wooden floor, his body relaxed but attentive, as if he recognizes something here that Michael cannot yet see. The room is simple, unchanged, held together by time rather than worn down by it. A small table sits near the window, a single chair pulled slightly away from it, not perfectly aligned, as if someone had stood up and never returned to finish what they started. A folded blanket rests neatly along the back of a narrow couch, its edges still sharp, untouched by dust. Nothing here feels abandoned. It feels paused. Michael exhales slowly, the sound quiet but uneven, and takes another step forward, his boots pressing into the wood with a soft creak that echoes just enough to remind him he is not imagining any of this. No one has been here, he says, more to himself than anything else, but even as the words leave him, they do not settle. They drift, uncertain, like they are waiting for something to contradict them. Shadow moves toward the far corner of the room, his nose lifting slightly, catching something in the air that does not belong to time or distance. He stops near a small shelf built into the wall, his posture still, his attention focused on something unseen. Michael notices immediately. He always notices when Shadow changes like that. "What is it?" he asks quietly, though he does not expect an answer, and yet part of him does. He walks closer, each step slower than the last, the space between them closing with a kind of quiet tension that feels both unfamiliar and inevitable. When he reaches the shelf, he sees it. A small oil lamp sits at the center, its glass clean, its metal base polished in a way that should not be possible after so many years. Beside it rests a worn book, its cover faded but intact, the edges softened from use rather than neglect. Michael's hand hovers just above it, his fingers hesitating not out of fear, but because something about the moment feels intentional, like it has been waiting for him to arrive before it reveals itself fully. Shadow lowers himself beside the shelf, calm now, as if his part in leading this moment is complete. Michael finally reaches out, his fingers brushing against the book, the texture familiar in a way that does not belong to memory alone. He lifts it slowly, the weight light but grounding, and turns it in his hands, the cover revealing itself fully in the dim light. It is a Bible. Not new. Not preserved for display. Used. Lived with. The kind that carries meaning in the way it is held, not just in what it contains. Michael swallows once, the motion subtle but real, his gaze fixed on the cover as something begins to move beneath the surface of his thoughts, something he has not allowed to rise in years. "She kept this close," he murmurs, the words almost lost as soon as they form, but the truth behind them remains. He opens it slowly. The pages shift with a soft sound, and as they settle, his eyes fall onto a section already marked, a thin strip of paper resting between the lines, placed there with care. He does not read it right away. He just looks. The air in the room feels different now, not heavier, not lighter, just present in a way that makes ignoring it impossible. Shadow remains beside him, still, steady, his presence quiet but constant, like something that does not need to be explained to be understood. Michael exhales again, longer this time, and lowers himself into the chair beside the table, the movement slow, deliberate, as if he is stepping into something he cannot step away from once he begins. He rests the book in his hands, his fingers tightening slightly around the edges, and for the first time since he arrived, he does not feel like leaving. He feels like listening. Michael Carter does not turn the page right away, his hands resting on the open Bible as if the weight of it carries more than paper and ink, something steady, something patient, something that does not demand to be rushed. The thin strip of paper marking the passage remains in place, unmoved, waiting, just as everything else in the room seems to be waiting without urgency. The light from the window shifts slightly, the late afternoon sun lowering just enough to cast a softer glow across the table, illuminating the edges of the pages in a quiet, almost deliberate way. Shadow remains at his side, his body relaxed against the floor, but his eyes are open, watching, present, as if this moment matters more than any movement. Michael exhales slowly, the breath leaving him in a long, controlled stream, and finally lowers his gaze to the marked passage. His eyes move across the words carefully, not scanning, not rushing, just taking them in one line at a time, and as he reads, something inside him tightens, not painfully, but deeply, like a memory pressing gently against a door he has kept closed for years. The words are simple. They do not try to impress. They do not try to convince. They simply exist, steady and unchanged, like they have always been there, whether he chose to look at them or not. Michael blinks once, his gaze lingering, then shifts slightly as the sound of the ocean reaches him again through the open door, the steady rhythm of waves against the shore moving through the air like a quiet reminder that time has not stopped, only slowed. He leans back slightly in the chair, the wood creaking softly beneath him, and closes his eyes for just a moment, not in exhaustion, but in something closer to hesitation. Not fear. Not resistance. Something quieter. Something that feels like standing at the edge of a memory he does not fully want to step into. A voice surfaces, faint at first, then clearer, not from the room, but from somewhere deeper, a voice he has not allowed himself to hear in a long time. His grandmother, steady and calm, reading from the same pages, her tone never forceful, never demanding, just present, just there, as if the words themselves carried enough weight without needing anything added to them. Michael's eyes open slowly, his gaze returning to the page, and this time the words do not feel distant. They feel close. Too close to ignore. "You never listened," he murmurs under his breath, though the words are not directed at her, not entirely. They settle into the space between thought and truth, where things are harder to deny. Shadow shifts slightly, his head lifting just enough to look at Michael, his ears relaxed, his expression calm, not reacting to the words, but to the change beneath them. Michael notices, of course he does. He always notices. "It is nothing," he says quietly, but the words do not carry weight anymore. They fall flat, like something he no longer believes even as he says it. He looks down again, his fingers tightening slightly against the edge of the page, and continues reading, his eyes moving slower now, more deliberate, as if each word needs to be understood, not just seen. The room remains still around him, the kind of stillness that does not interrupt, does not interfere, just allows. The wind outside softens, the sound of the water steady, constant, grounding. Michael's shoulders lower slightly, the tension that had been held there for so long easing in a way he does not fully notice, not yet. He exhales again, quieter this time, and rests his hand lightly against the page, not to turn it, not to move it, but to feel it, to anchor himself in something that does not shift beneath him. Shadow lowers his head again, settling into the floor, his presence unchanged, steady, constant, like something that does not need to prove itself to be real. Michael sits there, the book open in his hands, the words resting in his mind in a way they have not in years, and for the first time since he arrived on the island, the silence does not feel like something to escape. It feels like something that is holding him still long enough to hear what he has been avoiding. And this time, he does not close the book. He does not look away. He stays. Michael Carter does not notice the moment when the light inside the room shifts again, not dramatically, not in a way that demands attention, but subtly, as if the space itself is breathing in rhythm with something deeper than time. The sun lowers further beyond the horizon, and the soft glow that once filled the room begins to fade into a cooler, quieter tone, stretching long shadows across the wooden floor. He remains seated, the Bible still open in his hands, his fingers resting along the edge of the page as though moving them would break something fragile that has only just begun to form. Shadow lifts his head slowly, not in alertness, but in awareness, his ears adjusting slightly as the silence settles into a new kind of stillness. It is not emptiness. It is presence. Michael exhales, the breath steady, and leans forward slightly, his gaze returning to the words in front of him, but this time he is not just reading them. He is listening to what they stir. The memory of his grandmother grows clearer now, not as a distant echo, but as something closer, something that feels almost immediate, like she is just in the next room, her voice carrying softly through the air the way it used to when the windows were open and the ocean breeze moved through the house. He can almost see her sitting at this same table, the same book open, her hand steady, her eyes calm, never forcing him to understand, only allowing him the space to come back to it when he was ready. Michael swallows slowly, his throat tightening just enough to make the motion noticeable, and lowers his gaze, not to avoid the memory, but to hold on to it without letting it overwhelm him. "You waited," he murmurs quietly, the words slipping out before he can stop them, not directed at anyone in the room, but not entirely without direction either. Shadow shifts closer, his body pressing gently against Michael's leg, grounding him again in that quiet, steady way that asks for nothing but gives everything. Michael's hand moves slightly across the page, his fingertips brushing the paper as if the texture itself carries meaning, as if it connects him to something he has been disconnected from for far too long. The room remained still, the kind of stillness that does not interrupt thought but deepens it, allowing each moment to stretch just enough to be felt fully. Outside, the sound of the ocean continues, steady and unchanging, a rhythm that does not care whether he listens or not, but somehow feels louder now, more present, like it has been waiting for him to hear it again. Michael leans back slowly, the chair creaking beneath him, and lifts his eyes toward the window, watching as the last light fades into the horizon, leaving behind a soft, dim glow that settles gently over everything. He does not feel the urge to turn on a lamp. He does not reach for anything to fill the growing darkness. Instead, he stays where he is, allowing it to come, allowing the room to shift naturally into night, just as it always has. Shadow lowers himself again beside the chair, his breathing slow and even, his presence unchanged, constant, like something that does not need to be proven because it has never left. Michael looks down at the book once more, his expression quieter now, less guarded, the edges of resistance softening in a way that feels unfamiliar but not unwelcome. He turns the page gently, the sound soft, deliberate, and continues reading, not because he feels he has to, but because he no longer feels the need to stop. The words do not rush him. They do not demand understanding. They simply remain, steady and patient, the way they always have. And as the room settles fully into darkness, broken only by the faint outline of shapes and the quiet rhythm of the world outside, Michael realizes something he has not allowed himself to consider until now. Nothing here is trying to change him. Nothing is forcing him to believe. It is simply waiting. Waiting for him to stay long enough to hear what has always been there. And for the first time in a long time, he does not feel like leaving. The night settles fully around the island, not with darkness that feels heavy or uncertain, but with a quiet depth that allows every small sound to carry further, clearer, more intentional, and Michael Carter remains seated at the table, the open Bible still resting in his hands as if time itself has chosen to slow rather than pass. The faint outline of the room shapes itself through shadow and memory, the edges of furniture familiar enough that he does not need light to navigate them, and the steady rhythm of the ocean continues outside, each wave brushing the shore like a breath that never breaks. Shadow shifts slightly on the floor beside him, his body turning just enough to face the door, his ears lifting for a brief second before relaxing again, not in alertness, but in quiet awareness, as if something has changed in a way that cannot be seen but can be felt. Michael notices the movement immediately, his gaze lifting from the page, his attention drawn not by concern, but by the subtle shift in presence that has begun to define this place. He listens. Not for a specific sound, not for anything that demands explanation, but for the absence of something he used to carry constantly, a kind of inner noise that no longer fills the space inside him the way it once did. It is quieter now. Not empty. Just quieter. He closes the Bible slowly, his fingers resting on the cover for a moment longer than necessary, as if acknowledging that something has begun but does not need to be finished all at once. The motion is deliberate, careful, not out of hesitation, but out of respect for the stillness that has settled around him. He places the book back on the table, aligning it gently with the edge, a small action that feels meaningful without needing to be explained. Then he stands. The chair creaks softly behind him, the sound familiar, grounding, and he takes a step toward the window, his movements unhurried, his posture no longer carrying the same weight that followed him onto the island. The glass reflects only faint shapes in the darkness, but beyond it, the ocean stretches wide and endless, its surface catching the dim light of the sky in soft, shifting patterns. Michael rests his hand lightly against the frame, the wood cool beneath his fingers, and watches the horizon without searching it for anything. He does not expect answers. He does not expect signs. And yet something about the moment feels full, complete in a way that does not require anything more. Shadow rises quietly and moves to stand beside him, his shoulder brushing lightly against Michael's leg, the contact steady and familiar, grounding him in the present without pulling him away from it. Michael glances down briefly, his expression softer now, less guarded, and then returns his gaze to the water. "I thought I lost everything," he says quietly, the words carried into the night without resistance, without expectation of reply. They do not echo back. They do not need to. The silence holds them without judgment. A faint breeze moves across the island, brushing against the house, slipping through the edges of the doorframe, carrying with it the scent of salt and something older, something that feels less like a place and more like a presence. Michael closes his eyes for a moment, not to escape, but to feel it more clearly, to let it settle without interruption. The memory of his grandmother returns again, not as something distant, but as something steady, her voice calm, her presence unwavering, never forcing him to understand, only reminding him that he did not have to carry everything alone. He exhales slowly, the breath leaving him in a long, even stream, and when he opens his eyes again, the night looks the same, but he does not. Shadow lowers himself beside him once more, his body relaxed, his breathing slow and steady, as if this moment is exactly where he is meant to be. Michael remains at the window, his hand still resting against the frame, his gaze steady, his thoughts no longer racing ahead or pulling backward. They remain here. Present. And in that quiet, without sound, without movement, something becomes clear in a way that does not need to be spoken. He was never as alone as he believed. Not here. Not before. Not now. And for the first time, that truth does not feel distant. It feels close enough to stay. The night deepens, but it does not grow heavier, it grows quieter in a way that feels intentional, as if the island itself is settling into a rhythm that Michael Carter has only just begun to notice. He remains by the window, his hand resting lightly against the frame, his gaze no longer searching the horizon but simply holding it, allowing the slow movement of the water to exist without needing to understand it. The air shifts gently, a soft breeze moving through the space behind him, carrying the faint creak of the house as wood adjusts to the cooling temperature, a sound that should feel ordinary, but here it feels like something more, like a presence that does not interrupt, only accompanies. Shadow lifts his head again, this time more slowly, his ears angling toward the hallway that leads deeper into the house, his posture not tense, not alert, just aware in a way that suggests something has drawn his attention. Michael notices immediately, his eyes shifting from the window toward the interior, following the direction of Shadow's gaze. "What is it?" he asks quietly, though his voice carries less uncertainty now, less resistance, as if he is no longer expecting nothing, but something. Shadow does not move right away, he simply stands, turning his body toward the hallway with a calm certainty that does not rush or hesitate, then begins to walk, each step measured, each movement steady. Michael watches him for a moment, then exhales slowly, pushing himself gently away from the window and following, not out of urgency, but because something about this place has taught him that some things are meant to be followed without question. The hallway is narrow, the walls lined with small details he has not yet taken the time to notice, framed photographs, worn edges of wood, subtle marks that carry history without demanding attention. As he moves through it, the air feels slightly different, warmer, not by temperature, but by presence, like stepping into a space that has been lived in, not left behind. Shadow stops near a closed door at the end of the hall, his body still, his head tilted slightly, listening to something that Michael cannot hear, or perhaps has not learned to hear yet. Michael steps closer, his hand lifting toward the door, hovering just short of the handle, his breath steady, but deeper now, as if something beneath the surface is preparing to rise. "It is just a room," he says quietly, but the words do not carry belief, only habit. Shadow remains still, his presence unwavering, not urging, not insisting, simply there. Michael closes his eyes for a brief second, not to avoid the moment, but to feel it more clearly, and then he opens them again, his hand moving forward to rest against the handle. It turns easily. The door opens without resistance. The room beyond is small, simple, untouched in a way that feels deliberate rather than abandoned. A bed rests against one wall, the blanket neatly arranged, the surface smooth, as if it has been cared for rather than left. A small dresser stands beside it, its top clear except for a single object placed at the center. Michael steps inside slowly, his eyes drawn immediately to that object, his attention narrowing as the rest of the room fades into the background. It is a small wooden box. Not ornate. Not hidden. Just placed. Waiting. Shadow moves in beside him, his posture relaxed again, as if the act of reaching this point is what mattered, not what comes next. Michael approaches the dresser, each step quieter than the last, the space between him and the box closing with a kind of stillness that feels almost sacred. He reaches out slowly, his fingers brushing the surface of the wood, feeling its texture, its weight, its presence. It does not feel new. It does not feel old. It feels known. He lifts the lid carefully. Inside, there is no clutter, no collection of random items, only a single folded piece of paper resting at the center, placed with intention, positioned so that it cannot be missed. Michael's breath catches slightly, the rhythm breaking just enough to matter, and for a moment, he does not move. He just looks. The paper does not shift. It does not reveal anything on its own. It waits. Just like everything else here has waited. Shadow sits quietly beside him, his eyes lifted, his presence steady, as if this moment is not something to rush through, but something to step into fully. Michael exhales slowly, his hand moving forward at last, his fingers closing around the paper with a careful grip, and as he lifts it from the box, he understands something without needing to read a single word. This was not left behind. This was left for him. Michael Carter does not unfold the paper immediately, his fingers holding it lightly as if the weight of what it contains has already begun to settle before a single word is revealed. The room remains still around him, the kind of stillness that does not press, does not rush, but allows everything to exist exactly as it is. Shadow sits beside him, calm, grounded, his presence steady in a way that makes the silence feel complete rather than empty. Michael exhales slowly, the breath leaving him in a long, measured stream, and finally begins to open the paper. The fold gives easily, the edge is soft but intact, as if it has been handled with care, not forgotten over time. The handwriting is the first thing he notices. It is not unfamiliar. It is not distant. It is known in a way that does not require memory to confirm it. His grandmother's. The realization settles without shock, without resistance, simply as truth. His eyes move across the first line slowly, not scanning, not rushing, but receiving. If you are reading this, then you finally stopped running. Michael's breath pauses, just for a moment, the rhythm breaking gently before continuing again, quieter now, deeper. He does not look away. He does not question it. He continues. I always knew you would come back here, not because you had nowhere else to go, but because something in you would remember where you were never alone. The words do not accuse. They do not demand. They meet him exactly where he is, without judgment, without expectation. Michael swallows slowly, his grip tightening just slightly around the paper, not in resistance, but in acknowledgement of something he can no longer ignore. Shadow shifts closer, his shoulder brushing lightly against Michael's leg, grounding him in the present as the past rises quietly to meet it. Michael lowers himself onto the edge of the bed without realizing, the motion slow, almost automatic, his focus still fixed on the letter as he continues reading. You thought you lost your life when everything fell apart, but you only lost what was never meant to carry you. The line lingers, settling deeper than the others, not sharp, not overwhelming, but steady in a way that leaves no space for denial. Michael's eyes close briefly, not to escape the words, but to feel them fully, to let them reach the parts of him he has kept guarded for so long. The room remains quiet, the air still, the island holding the moment without interruption. When he opens his eyes again, he continues. I have prayed for you every day, not that your life would be easy, but that you would remember you were never walking it alone. His jaw tightens slightly, the movement subtle but real, and for the first time since he arrived, something shifts beneath the surface, not breaking, not collapsing, but softening in a way he does not know how to control. Shadow lowers himself at his feet, his presence unchanged, steady, constant, as if he has always known this moment would come. Michael's gaze moves to the final lines, his breathing slower now, more deliberate, as if each word carries weight that must be fully received. God did not leave you, Michael. You just walked so far into the noise that you could not hear him anymore. The words settle in the room, not as sound, but as truth, quiet and undeniable. Michael does not move for a long moment. He does not speak. He does not look away. The letter rests in his hands, the edge is no longer just paper, but something that connects what he believed to what has always been there, waiting. His shoulders lower slightly, the tension that once defined his posture easing in a way that feels unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. He exhales slowly, the breath leaving him in a steady stream, and this time, it does not carry resistance. It carries release. He lowers the letter carefully, his hands resting in his lap, his gaze unfocused for a moment as everything settles into place without force, without demand. Shadow shifts slightly closer, his presence warm and steady, enough. Michael looks down at him briefly, his expression softer now, quieter, and then lifts his gaze toward the window, where the night remains unchanged, wide and still. Nothing outside has shifted. The ocean still moves. The wind still breathes. The island still waits. But inside, something is no longer running. And for the first time in a long time, Michael does not feel the need to escape it. He stays. Michael Carter remains seated on the edge of the bed for a long moment after the last word settles, the letter still resting loosely in his hands, no longer something he needs to hold tightly, no longer something he fears letting go. The room does not change, the air does not shift, and yet everything feels different in a way that does not need to be seen to be understood. Shadow lies at his feet, his breathing slow and even, his presence steady, as if nothing about this moment surprises him, as if he has been waiting for Michael to arrive here long before the journey ever began. Michael exhales slowly, the breath leaving him in a long, quiet stream, and this time it does not carry resistance, it does not carry doubt, it simply exists, like everything else in this space. He lowers the letter carefully onto the bed beside him, smoothing it once with his hand, not out of habit, but out of respect, as if the words themselves deserve to remain undisturbed now that they have been heard. His gaze lifts toward the window again, the darkness outside unchanged, the ocean still moving in its steady rhythm, the wind still brushing softly against the house, and for the first time he does not feel separate from it. He feels part of it. He leans back slightly, resting his hands against the edge of the mattress, his posture no longer rigid, no longer held together by effort, but relaxed in a way that feels unfamiliar and yet deeply right. "I stopped listening," he says quietly, the words barely more than a breath, but they carry truth now, not denial. They settle into the room without echo, without resistance, simply becoming part of the silence that holds everything together. Shadow lifts his head slightly at the sound, his ears adjusting, his eyes soft, not questioning, not reacting, just present in the way he always is. Michael glances down at him, a small shift in his expression, something gentler, something that no longer hides behind distance or control. Then he looks forward again, his eyes unfocused for a moment as something inside him continues to settle, not quickly, not forcefully, but steadily, like water finding its level after being disturbed. He pushes himself up slowly, the motion unhurried, and walks toward the doorway, the floor creaking softly beneath his steps, the sound no longer sharp or intrusive, just part of the space he now belongs to. Shadow rises immediately, moving with him, not ahead, not guiding, just beside him, matching his pace without effort. They move down the hallway together, the walls no longer lined with unfamiliar details, but with quiet reminders of something that has always been there, waiting to be noticed. When they reach the main room, the darkness has settled fully, but it does not feel empty. It feels calm. Michael pauses near the table, his hand brushing lightly against the surface where the Bible still rests, closed now, but no longer distant, no longer something he avoids. He does not open it again. He does not need to. Not right now. Instead, he moves toward the door, his hand reaching for the handle without hesitation. When he opens it, the night air meets him gently, cool and clean, carrying the scent of salt and something deeper, something that feels less like a place and more like presence. He steps outside, the wooden porch firm beneath his feet, the sound of the ocean clearer now, steady, constant, unchanging. Shadow steps out beside him, his body relaxed, his gaze forward, his presence as steady as the rhythm of the waves. Michael walks a few steps forward, stopping near the edge of the porch, his eyes lifting toward the horizon, though there is nothing to see in the darkness beyond. And yet he does not feel the need to see. He feels enough. He breathes in slowly, the air filling his lungs fully, without resistance, without weight, and when he exhales, it is not to release something he has been holding back, but to simply exist in the moment as it is. The wind moves softly around him, the ocean continues its quiet rhythm, and for the first time, he does not feel like he is standing apart from it. He feels like he has stepped back into something that never left him. Shadow lowers himself onto the porch beside him, calm and still, his presence grounding the moment without interrupting it. Michael remains standing, his posture relaxed, his gaze steady, his thoughts no longer scattered or distant. They are here. With him. And in that quiet, without needing proof, without needing explanation, he understands something that has been waiting for him to stop long enough to see it. Nothing here is trying to convince him. Nothing here is trying to change him. It is simply revealing what has always been true. And this time, he does not turn away. He stays. The night holds steady around Michael Carter, but it no longer feels like something that surrounds him, it feels like something that carries him, something that exists with him rather than apart from him, and he stands there on the porch for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon he cannot see, yet somehow understands more clearly than ever before. The ocean continues its quiet rhythm, each wave rising and falling in a pattern that does not need to be explained, only felt, and the wind moves gently through the trees behind him, brushing against the house, against his jacket, against his face, not cold, not harsh, just present. Shadow remains beside him, his body still, his breathing slow and even, his presence steady in a way that has never changed, as if he has always known that this moment would come, not as an ending, but as something closer to a beginning that does not need to announce itself. Michael exhales slowly, the breath leaving him without tension, without weight, and for the first time in a long time, there is nothing behind it that he needs to let go of. He is not carrying anything that does not belong anymore. He steps forward slightly, the wooden boards of the porch creaking softly beneath his weight, and lowers himself down to sit, his back resting lightly against the side of the house, his posture relaxed in a way that does not require effort. Shadow shifts immediately, moving closer, settling beside him with quiet certainty, his shoulder pressing gently against Michael's side, grounding him in a way that does not ask for acknowledgement but receives it anyway. Michael glances down briefly, a small movement, a quiet recognition, and then looks forward again, his eyes steady, his expression calm, no longer guarded, no longer searching for something that is not there. The silence does not press against him anymore. It holds him. He rests his hands loosely in front of him, his fingers relaxed, no tension, no urgency, and lets the moment exist without trying to shape it into something more. The island does not change. The ocean does not stop. The night does not speak. And yet something has been answered in a way that does not require sound. He closes his eyes for just a moment, not to escape, but to feel, to allow everything that has settled within him to remain. Without interruption, and when he opens them again, nothing outside has shifted, but everything inside has found its place. He breathes in slowly, the air filling his lungs completely, clean and steady, and as he exhales, there is no resistance, no hesitation, just a quiet acceptance that does not need to be named to be real. Shadow lowers his head, resting it lightly against Michael's leg, his eyes half closed, his presence unchanged, constant, enough. Michael leans his head back against the wall of the house, his gaze lifting slightly toward the sky, where faint stars begin to appear, distant and steady, not bright enough to command attention, but present enough to be seen if he chooses to look. And this time, he does. He does not turn away. He does not question. He does not search for meaning beyond what is already there. He simply allows it. The memory of everything he believed he lost no longer feels like something broken. It feels like something that led him here, not to be fixed, not to be undone, but to be understood in a way that only stillness could reveal. He exhales again, softer this time, and for the first time, there is no distance between what he feels and what he allows himself to know. He was never left behind. Not by the place. Not by the past. Not by the presence he thought had disappeared. He was simply not listening. And now, finally, he is. The ocean continues. The wind moves. The night holds. And Michael Carter does not move away from it. He stays, not because he has nowhere else to go, but because he has finally arrived somewhere he does not need to leave.